Okay, well, thank you for coming along this evening, everybody. My name's Lewis Olding. I'm the Product Development Manager for Nurajacks. And with me tonight is Mike Chantry, who is our Retail Store Manager. And the two others that work with us, Joseph from Wellington, he looks after the Lower North Island for our retail stores. And then David, he's our rep in the South Island, and he gets around the retail stores down there. So the purpose of tonight's webinar is to give you an overview of Nurajacks and Nuraspikes when building timber decks. So we're going to get through the information quite quickly, and Mike Chantry is going to do that for us. But before we get started, if you've used Zoom before, you'll know that there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We want to encourage as many questions as possible and we'll make this as interactive as possible. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Mike Chantry, who will take us through the first part of our presentation.
Awesome, thank you, Lewis. And again, welcome everybody to our webinar this evening. Really nice to have you along. I guess the first question we need to ask is, what is a Nurajack? Well, a Nurajack is a decking pedestal for supporting joists or bearers to create a level deck structure. And a Nurajack can go over membrane, it can go over concrete, or any other stable non-eroding surface. So you can see in the picture there on your home screen, go back. You can see the Nurajacks on the concrete, and then they're supporting the joists. So our webinar tonight is divided up into 5 sections. So we're going to have a look at the building code. And we're going to see why we need to use Nurajacks over membrane. Then we'll look at some features of the Nurajacks. In the installation section, we'll look at a few principles around installing the Nurajacks when you're building a deck. So I see we've got a few builders here tonight, so that's awesome. We'll talk you through the quickest and most practical way to set up a deck structure using the Nurajacks. And a couple of new products on the market as well that we have, and then we can talk about some projects and run through some of those. So why do we need to use Nurajacks according to the building code? Well, to answer that, E2AS1 of the building code, as you would know, talks about everything outside of the building structure and water tightness, basically. And 0.7.3.1.1 talks about removable surfaces, and it says that any structure or any layer that goes over a waterproof membrane, it has to be raised and it has to be removable. So when I was an apprentice, we just used to rip our joists down, staple some supercourse to the bottom, chuck them on the membrane, yahoo, we were done. But the building code changed, and it says now that it has to be raised and it has to be removable. So you can see in the figure or section drawing there, figure 17A, there's the deck structure going over a membrane. So as you know, H3.2 joist, decking on top, and you'll see that that deck structure is set on top of a pedestal, so it's raised off the membrane. Now, just to go into a little bit more detail there, this is our Nurajack specification drawing, which is part of the specification, and we can see a section drawing of a waterproof membrane deck. So here we've got the finished floor level of the deck, and generally there's a 100mm step down from the finished floor level to the top of the membrane, and then that membrane is on a fall going down to the outlet, so the water obviously flows down and then out the drain. So there we can see a level deck structure, a level entry, and that is supported there by the Nurajack decking pedestals. So one, it's raised off the membrane, it's not sat on it, so that water can flow freely under there, and those joists aren't going to suck up any moisture that's sitting on the membrane. Two, it's removable, because those decking boards will be screwed down to the joist, or they'll have some type of clip system. So the decking can be unscrewed, the boards can be removed, and then that drain and gutter can be cleaned out and maintained and then replaced. Now you'll notice too that the building code requires a 12mm gap from the edge of the decking to the cladding. And you know the reason for that, if you jam up your decking against the weatherboard, and then water's going to sit in there and rot out the weatherboard or it's going to rot out the deck. So it needs that 12mm gap so that the water can flow down and then out the membrane. And later on in our webinar, we'll talk about the products that achieve that as part of our Nurajack decking system. So that's low profile decks going over membrane. But also part of the Nurajack decking system, we have a Nuraspike and Nurajack, and this is used for doing low profile decks going over grass or going over dirt. You might have seen the Nuraspike newly released on the market just a few months ago. Now, as you know, decks under a metre don't require a permit. However, that doesn't mean that we can just build the deck however we like. So even if a low profile deck doesn't require a permit, it still has to be built according to the New Zealand Building Code. So our foundations, the size of our bearers, the spacing of our bearers, the spacing of our joists all need to comply with the building code. So then just to review that section, why do we need to use Nurajacks according to the building code? Well, anything going over membrane has to be raised and it has to be removable for cleaning and maintenance. And even though a deck is under a metre and doesn't require a permit, it still has to be built according to the code. So the next feature of our webinar is we're going to talk about some features of the Nurajacks. So you might have seen the Nurajacks before or used them before. You'll notice the wide base of the Nurajack and then those fins that go up the side of the Nurajack. That means that we can put 1 ton of weight per Nurajack and it will spread the load out over the membrane. So it means that if there's a spa pool going on or maybe an outdoor fireplace or something like that, the Nurajack can handle that load and it will spread the load over the membrane so it doesn't point load and damage that membrane. Also, the Nurajacks are easy to adjust the height of them just by winding the thread up and down. So it's pretty simple and straightforward. And then you'll notice there the 35mm upstand on the head of the Nurajack. So there's some holes in there so the Nurajack can be screwed into the joist and then that's all locked in place. Now, one of the great features about the Nurajack and something that all builders really love is the self-leveling head. So it can self-level up to 4.5 degrees, and that works on like a ball and cup type scenario. So you might have maybe a valley on a waterproof membrane deck, or maybe there's a bit of a dish in the concrete. Well, that self-leveling head means that the base of the Nurajack is going to sit hard on the membrane, and then that ball and cup type design will take up the fall any which way so that the base of the jack is hard on the membrane and that's supported nicely, and then the head just twists so that the joist also is level and it's straight. So it means that you don't have to try and pack the jack and get it right. Just screw it to the joist, wind it down, and then it'll self-level like that. Nurajacks are made from 100% recycled content, and the Nurajacks are made in Italy, and all of them come with a 20-year warranty on the product. Now, our range of Nurajacks, we go from our smallest self-leveling Nurajack, which is the SE0. Wait, computer problems, getting late. Which is the SE0, and that starts at 28mm. And then we go all the way up to 550mm, so plenty of height there. Now the SE0 to the SE5 is made up of a base, a thread, and a head. And you'll see these codes that are stamped on the base of the Nurajack and also on the thread of the Nurajack. Now the SE0 through to the SE2, these components aren't interchangeable with other jacks. They have to go together to make up those jacks. But the SE3 base is our tallest base, and that does the rest of the range of the Nurajacks. Then where we get our additional height in the Nurajack is by adding an extension element. So we can go 1, 2, and then right up to 3 extension elements to get that 550 mils. So all of those jacks take 1 ton of weight. They all adjust using the thread, so winding it to height, and they all have a self-leveling head up to 4.5 degrees. Now, our lowest profile Nurajack is the Nurapad, which is a 12mm disc, and that sits straight on the membrane. And then the joist, be it a timber joist or an aluminium joist, sits in between the tabs of the Nurajack, and that holds that into place. Now the Nuraspike, we talked about that before, being used for low profile decks going out over grass or going out over dirt. And that's a 550mm long ground spike that gets driven into the ground using a sledgehammer, and then the Nurajack sits on top of that ground spike. Now each Nuraspike can withstand loads of 500 kgs per Nuraspike. So the New Zealand Building Code requires 2 kPa loading 2 kPa loading on a deck. When we did our testing using the Nuraspikes and the structure that we built, we achieved 20 kPa loading. So it can handle heavy loads that are put upon it, and it's not going to sink. It's made of 4mm galvanized steel, and that galvanized steel is going to last a minimum of 20 years in the ground. So think of that as your replacement pile for your low profile decks. Now, how is it put into the ground? Well, you can see these top pictures here. We simply have a Nuraspike hitting plate that gets put on top of the Nuraspike, and then that gets hammered right into the ground. So for you guys, when you're doing it, make sure that you hammer the Nuraspike right down so it sits flush with the ground. I went to one job and they were like, yeah, we're all ready to go, and they left their Nuraspike sort of sitting 100 mils up. Make sure that they're right down into the ground and they're sitting flush with it so it's nice and solid. And really the secret to the Nuraspike system is the Nurajack, because of the height adjustment in it. Doesn't matter if there's if the ground's going up and down, or if there's a bit of a fall on the ground. Simply place the Nurajack on top of the Nuraspike that's been hit right into the ground, and then wind it up to height. So you can see here in this next picture, we've got some weed mat on the ground, or you could use poly to stop any moisture coming up and grass growing up through the deck. Then the Nurajacks are down, sitting on those Nuraspikes, and then wound to height, and then we've got all our joists all laid out, all straight and ready to go. So you can use a Nuraspike with a Nurajack directly under a joist, or you can use it under a bearer as well. So the head of the Nurajack is 85 mils, so you can fit a double bearer on there. If it's 90 or 100, that's cool. So you can see, again, to think of that Nuraspike and Nurajack as your pile replacement. So there's a pile, Nuraspike, Nurajack, then you got a bearer on there, or you can just put it directly under the joist. Up to you, and it depends on how much height you've got. Nurajack system also has tiles. We do a lot of tile jobs, and Lewis is the man to talk about this.
Thanks, Mikey. I won't say much about this other than the jacks have the same feature of the self-leveling head, same loading, weight, and they have a special acoustic pad that's actually on top of the jack, that white rubber there that minimizes footfall. They're also adjustable without lifting the jack, and instead of winding the base like you would with a timber joist, you actually use an adjustment key. If you go to nurajack.co.nz/webinars, you'll come across our Nurajack tile installation webinar that we did about 4 weeks ago. Feel free to have a look at that. It will give you a good overview of the Nurajack with tile head. Well, that takes us through to installation. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to fire them through the Q&A, and I'll be able to answer those in the background while Mike's going for it. Thanks, Mike.
Cool, thank you, Louis. So our next part of our webinar, as Lewis mentioned, is installation. So a little while ago, we made a video of us building a deck using Nurajacks and the Nuraspike. You might have seen that video. It's on our website, also on YouTube. We use it as training, doing in-store training, and also on Instagram, things like that. But in this section, rather than play the video, we just wanted to pick out a couple of features just to talk you through some principles around installation and creating a deck going over Nurajacks. So we see the house here. This is your pretty pretty standard single level home for New Zealand, maybe 150, 200 millimeter step down coming out from the patio or from the house onto the patio. And the owners of this house wanted to create a level entry deck and obviously use it for some nice outdoor living space. So a couple of options that they could have done to build a deck: cut up the concrete, get a digger in, rip it all out, pay to dump it, big mess, dig holes, put piles down. Or they could have cut holes in the concrete, then dug holes and then put their piles in. Or they could do, and what we did is use Nurajacks and put the Nurajacks straight on top of the concrete. Because that concrete was in good nick, right over the concrete area, we put Nurajacks down. That concrete was all falling to a drain, but again, the self-leveling head took up that angle, so it meant that we didn't have to cut any packers or rip any joists or anything. Nurajacks straight on the ground and then joists on top of that. Where we went past the concrete and over onto the grass and the dirt section, we then drove Nuraspikes into the ground and then put our Nurajacks on top of the Nuraspike. And we used that section to form a bearer. So that was the very outside of our deck that we used to support our joists. Now, this is the part that you're really gonna want to take note of, is how we set it up. So we've got our line of Nurajacks going along the house there, and those are all wound pretty close to height. And then we've got our bearer at our perimeter, which is level and that's straight. Then from that point, we run all our joists out. So we're sitting our joist on this Nurajack and sitting it on the bearer. So rather than running a line of Nurajacks down the line of the joist, sitting the joist on, it rocks around, tweaking each joist, just set your perimeters up. So set up the Nurajacks along the house, then do your bearer, get that level and straight, then just run all your joists out, and then at the perimeters again, get those points level and straight, fix them in, and then come through afterwards, screw the Nurajacks to the joist at the centers like we've done there, and then wind them down, and then you can use those points to straighten your joist. So stringline a Dodger block or a laser through the center and do it that way. So rather than setting up a whole line of jacks, putting the joist on, do your perimeters first, get that level and straight, and then you can come through the center afterwards and then just tweak it as you go. So you can wind each one up and down as you need to. Means you don't have to do any planing if the gauging and the joist is different. Then you can see we've just done solid blocking through the joists. That's good practice. Boys are laying the decking there. We use 140 grappa for this, and just remember to keep your spacings between your decking boards as well. For 140, the spacing is 6 mils. For 90, it's 4 mils. Quite often you see guys really like to jam them up. But when the board swells, that puts pressure on the joist, and it has a tendency to want to lift. So if you keep those spacings, then that's cool. And then finished product. So you can see there, this deck structure is contained by the house, and it's contained by this raised garden at the front. We get a lot of questions. Do I need to fix the joist to the concrete? Do I need to fix it to the Nurajack? Well, the Nuraspike, sorry. The deck that we did here, it's purely floating deck. So no Nurajacks are fixed to the concrete or to the Nuraspikes. It's not fixed back into the house. It's a floating structure. So do you need to contain it? Well, I guess it depends on the size of the deck. If it's quite a big deck, it's not going to go anywhere. The weight of it is going to hold it in place, but nothing to stop you from putting some fixings in, fixing the jack to the spike, or if you want to put a couple of ordinary piles in around the perimeter, that's good for your working, help you to square it up and keep it in place, up to you. So we're not making any hard and fast rules around it. Whatever works for you in that project is cool, and that's going to work. You can see, if you haven't seen that video, you can check out the full video on our website, nurajack.co.nz. It goes for about 2 minutes or something. It's pretty short, and that project we did it in a day. We started laying the jacks at around about lunchtime, and then we had all our decking done and tacked by that night, and then we came back the next day, half a day, and screwed it off. So it was a real quick way of doing that. Just a couple of principles around installation with regards to using the Nurapad. So we don't see this a lot, but you can do it, ripping the whole joist to the fall of the membrane and then just sitting that joist in the Nurapad. So if you've got enough guts in your joist, you can rip it down and then sit it in the Nurapad. Just make sure though that you don't get too thin at the top end, otherwise the timber becomes less stable and it might want to tweak up. This is the most common sort of thing that we see is Nurapads for the first meter. If you remember going back to the building code, usually you got 100 mil step down, but if you're using 4x2 and 20 mil, it's 110. So a little bit of the joist just gets ripped, sat in the Nurapad, and then once the fall of the deck gets greater, then you just go out to your Nurajacks. And again, just to review, the Nuraspike just gets driven into the ground using a sledgehammer and the hitting plate, 4mm galvanized steel. So that's going to last 20 years in the ground. Nurajack on top, and then you can either use it to support a bearer and then put your joists on top of that, or if you don't have a lot of room, then you can just use it to support your joists. Lewis, you want to take over?
Yeah, give you a break, Mike. So our brochure highlights some of those key features of the Nuraspike, that it's fast. And as Mike mentioned, we did that deck in two 4-hour goes really. So the reason why it's fast, you just drive it into the ground, you can build straight away, no waiting for concrete to cure or anything like that. It's easy, it's a lot easier to whack something into the ground than dig a hole, and it's durable, at least 20 years. We know it will go a lot longer than that. They come flat packed, the Nuraspike. So on the back of the brochure and on all of our boxes and everything, it shows the installation, the assembly instructions. You just need a impact driver or a drill to be able to assemble them. And there are some precautions that we just want to run through those precautions with you just real quickly if you're considering using the Nuraspike. You need to obviously check for in-ground services. It's not suitable for waterlogged soil, so swamp, that sort of thing. Also, if there's a layer of rock, you're just not going to get through it. However, you get through a lot of roots of trees and that sort of thing real well because the galvanized steel is actually quite sharp. So you don't have to take too much precaution around trees and that sort of thing. You will get through it. I'm not sure if this tree will survive too much longer, but you'll get through it anyway. You need to assemble the Nuraspike completely and use the hitting plate that's provided. If you don't use the hitting plate, it's loud because it's metal on metal with your sledgehammer, but it also will deform to an extreme degree the top plate of the Nuraspike. We expect, even with the hitting plate, some deformation of the head of the Nuraspike, but the Nurajack can certainly bridge that, and it's not really an issue. So some indentation's fine, and just use a hitting plate. Ensure that the deck complies with all relevant governmental or local council requirements, and follow the manufacturer's instruction for the placement and structure of the deck that you're building. As Mike's already mentioned, if you rip the joists down too thin, the movement within the structure of the deck or the decking boards can cause the thinner ripped timber to bow. If you are really struggling for height anywhere, consider using an aluminium joist like Outdoor's quick build system, and we're going to just cover off a little bit of that a little bit later.
Thanks, Lewis. Now, placement of Nurajacks under a joist. So we get asked this quite a lot. How often, how many Nurajacks do I need to use? How far apart do I need to place them? On the back of the boxes of 5 that you see at Placemakers is this placement graph. It's also on our website and in our brochures. So there's 2 different lines here. So there's a light blue line. So the light blue line is your recommended spacing for going over membrane. So you can see, say for example, we're using a 4x2 joist over membrane, and then we need to space that, or we need to space the Nurajack at 600 centers down the line of the joist. So say for example that this joist here is 4x2, then we're going 600 centers with our Nurajacks down the line of the joist. If it's 6x2, then we're going out to 800 centers. Now the reason for that is to spread the load out over the membrane, so there's no point loading on the membrane, and that will protect the membrane. That's not your joist spacing. Your joist spacing is still governed by the size of your decking, but that's the Nurajack spacing down the line of the joist. Now the dark blue line there is for over other surfaces, so like concrete or the Nuraspike. So say for example, if you're using a 4x2 joist again, and you're going over concrete or over a Nuraspike, then you can space your Nurajacks and your spikes out at 1 meter. So if this was just Nurajacks underneath that joist, then you could go 1 meter under every joist. And if it was 6x2, then you would go out to 12. And then use that as your guide for the bearer as well. So if you're using a 6x2 bearer, then you would have your spikes and your Nurajacks at 1200 centers underneath the bearer. It is a little bit on the conservative side of 3604, but if you use both of those as your guide, then you'll be sweet, and there'll be no bounce and spring in your deck. Back to you, Lewis.
Yes, I mentioned before about the aluminium frame system that Altdure makes, and because it's interesting when you look at what they do. They can put, whether it be timber or composite decking on top of their aluminium frame. They can also put their tiles, they can match into that real simply, and even synthetic turf. The reason why they can do all that is because aluminium is inherently more stable. It's not affected by the moisture that timber is, and so there's less likelihood of movement being within that structure. Another thing with Altdure is that they're very quick to build, in that they can actually prefab the frame off-site. So that's one of the features there. Mike, could you just go to the next slide there? The other advantage of the aluminium frame is that you can have greater spans. So when you look at this drawing here, you can see that the span for a 45 by 45 joist is actually 1200. And then you could have your bearers or the jacks at 1200 centers for a 45mm joist. Then you're going out over to a 90 by 45, you're at 2100. So a lot greater span. The Nurajacks can handle a ton of weight. So using aluminium frame systems like Quick Build from Altdure, you can still put that sort of load on those jacks if you're spanning at those sorts of centers. Note too on this drawing as well, we see here a spot footing as an option under a Nurajack, and that's more than acceptable. Doing spot footings under, if you can't use a Nuraspike for some reason, you can use a spot footing quite satisfactory, and we see that from time to time around the place. So that's just a few options around aluminium frame system.
Thank you, Louis. Do you want to talk us through the new product as well?
Okay. So this is a product that we developed recently. In New Zealand, as Mike highlighted, you need a 12mm gap around the perimeter of a deck. It's not required overseas. So this product here is required in New Zealand. It's basically, we call it a cladding clip. As you can see here, you can screw it to a timber joist, and that will give you that 12mm gap. It's adjustable, you can move it in and out depending on where it needs to be. Has a little bit of give in it as well, so if there's expansion and contraction of the deck, it will take that up. So we developed that about 2 years ago, and it also sits on top of the heads of Nurajacks for tiles, so it does the same job as that.
Okay, well, on to the last section of our webinar, and that's projects. So we're going to look at a couple of projects that we've done using Nurajacks, and the first one is a rooftop deck. So this house construction, it's got a flat roof on top and sort of a couple of pods, and the owners wanted to make the best use of space. So instead of leaving it just with the membrane, they decided to put a rooftop deck on top. So you can see the Nurajacks going on the membrane there, and then that deck structure straight down, jack straight down on the membrane, and then the finished product is just awesome. So really good use of space there, and real mint spot as well, real nice setting. Our next one, Lewis, you want to talk through this one?
Yeah, so this was on Instagram the other day by AP Builders. I'm not sure if you follow them. They were doing a low profile deck around a swimming pool, and you can see here that they've just run a row of 2 rows of Nuraspikes into just some typical soil in the backyard, and then they installed it using a microcarpa hitting plate, which we were more than happy with, to be honest. It still protects the plate enough for to be able to receive the Nurajack. And then they've run their joists out here, and they've got their decking going down. So real simple. One thing to note: no dirt lying around anywhere. No wheelbarrow full of dirt as they're having to dig the holes. No mess really compared to a traditional way. And they've got a real functional low-profile deck and next to a swimming pool. It's excellent.
Yeah,
The next, oh, sorry, Mike. The next one is a project that was actually in Mangere Bridge, a house that's up for sale. They wanted to dress up the backyard, so put the Nuraspikes in with a double bearer, a 6x2 double bearer, and you can see the spacings of the jacks being increased for that 6x2, and then there's the low profile deck dressing up the backyard there for a house for sale. So real quick, again, no mess, and real straightforward. Outdoor have a number of systems that you might have seen if you're up in Auckland around. This is in High Street, an extension of a footpath using an aluminium frame and their composite decking. Remember, the Nurajacks adjust, so they were able to make that whole walkway level wherever it went, no matter what the drainage was doing along that gutter's edge there. So that whole walkway is nice and level and no trip hazards. So that was a good solution. And then finally, we've got one here for outdoor, which was over an existing tiled substrate. I don't know why they uplifted the tiles. They could have actually put the jacks over the existing tiles, but you can see here they've removed it. That brown stuff that looks like sawdust is actually tile glue. But because the jacks can withstand going over any surface, even if it's a little bit out of shape, they're strong enough, they just put the jacks down over that old tile glue and then put the aluminium frame and composite decking on top. So that was another nice project.
Yeah, looks mint. This one here was a couple of customers. They wanted to sell their house, but they had exposed concrete around their pool, and it was starting to break up and look tired and a bit ugly. So rather than getting a digger in, ripping it all out, they just put the Nurajack straight on top of the concrete, put some joists down, and then built a timber deck on top. You can see a spa pool at the top of that picture there. So those Nurajacks can easily withstand that load. And then finished product with the decking down looks mint. So simple solution to what could have been a big job.
Yeah. And this final project that we'd like to highlight, you can see, this is a house of a young girl. She's about 17, 18 years old now. We did this about 4 years ago. She ended up in a wheelchair as a 13-year-old, and her access into the house was this aluminium ramp, but she still had another 150 mil step to get into the house in the little entranceway here. It just wasn't really suitable for her. So we heard about it through the managing director. His friend told us about it. Mike had just joined the company, and so we, being an ex-builder, we put him straight to work so he could learn a bit more about the Nurajacks. And here's the frame that he's building for the ramp. And there's the managing director of Nuralight, John Simmons, making sure that it's level entry for the family. See the 4x2 just on Nurajacks there, no nogging in that one. Just the decking holds it in place, and then the Nurajacks there. Now, because the ramp was less than 4.5 degrees pitch, that we did the ramp solely out of the Nurajacks, so there was no need to muck around too much. That whole the whole system's not affixed to those cobbles or bricks that are laid down as cobbles. The whole system is floating. It's not affixed to any of the walls. And when the young girl, when she came out and saw this, and she was for the first time she was able to gain access to her house, she came down that ramp just on her back wheels. She was so happy, and it was a really neat thing to see, actually. So it's a project that we're really happy about, and just shows the versatility of the Nurajacks. You know, people are putting relocatable buildings on them, containers are going on them, tiny homes are being built on them because they're adjustable, self-leveling. They're suitable over most substrates. So that really brings our presentation to conclusion. haven't had any questions. So Mike, you've done an excellent job. This is your third go at this presentation, mate. So you've been improving all the time, answering all the questions as we go.
Just warming up.
Just warming up. Well, I'm just going to launch a final concluding poll while I talk through this last slide. The nurajack.co.nz is your resource for any extra information. Videos, of course, that Mike's talked about, along with other videos like how to assemble a Nuraspike, photos of other projects, all annotated with different points to note and references, so you can make good decisions on how to set out, for instance. They're all there under the gallery. There's the technical downloads section, which is all the technical drawings in PDF, DWG, DXF. All of our other documentation is downloadable there. Our contact details are there, but if you prefer, we have a live chat that's actually manned by a human that will answer all your questions. Use the live chat feature, or use Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube to communicate with us. We're here to help. More than happy to talk to you about your projects that you've got coming up or you're working on, or even just to find out whether the Nurajack and Nuraspike is suitable for your location. Just give us a call or send us a message, and we'd love to help you out. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for attending our webinar this evening. Sorry we've gone over just a little bit in time. Mike likes to talk. I'm kidding, but we really appreciate your time this evening. So thank you very much. We hope you join us for another webinar in a not too distant future.